CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories this hour. Aid groups warn the humanitarian situation in Gaza is hell on earth as the United Nations vows to continue ceasefire efforts. Polls open in Egypt's presidential election, overshadowed by a deepening economic crisis and the fighting in neighbouring Gaza. In Argentina, Javier Milei is sworn in as the country's new president. We'll have the latest from Buenos Aires. Not just a catastrophe, but hell on earth. That's the latest stark warning from aid groups about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The United Nations says half the population is starving, with conditions making deliveries of food almost impossible. Israel is pushing ahead with its air and ground offensive and has ordered more evacuations in the main southern city of Khan Yunis. But the head of the World Health Organization says no one is safe in Gaza.
As more and more people move to a smaller and smaller area, overcrowding combined with the lack of adequate food, water, shelter and sanitation are creating the ideal conditions for disease to spread. On average, there is one shower unit for every 700 people and one toilet for every 150 people.
Our correspondent Noor Harazin reports from central Gaza.
Well, yes, the situation here, the humanitarian situation is just, a catastrophe. I mean, there is no access to clean water, there is no access to food, there is no access to medicine, even the very simple, if we're talking about the simple paracetamol painkiller here, it is not available, not in the hospitals or in the private pharmacies around the Gaza Strip. There is no diapers for the children. There is no milk for the toddlers. There is no women's sanitary pads here for the women in Gaza. I mean, yes, it is hell on earth, as you mentioned before. People are starving. It is a war of starvation. No one actually here on the ground, if you are displaced or whoever you are, you do not have any access to food or water because the markets are empty. The shelves are empty. There's nothing in the markets here. At the same time, the Palestinian Health Ministry is warning of a spread of viruses, a new pandemic, because of the situation inside the hospitals, as the hospitals became as a shelter and a refugee camp for thousands for Palestinians here in Gaza. However, this comes as there is an UN effort to reopen the Karem Shalom border between Gaza and Israel in order to allow more humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Nothing has happened yet. However, people are hopeful that the opening of this border will bring some relief to the humanitarian situation here in Gaza. When the latest 7-day humanitarian truce expired, there were some optimistic statements from the Qatari foreign minister. They said that the negotiations are intensifying, they could reach a new truce. However, nowadays, what is happening here on the ground, the very intense battles between Hamas and Israel, the big number of people killed here in Gaza, and we're feeling actually that the past week was more intense than before the humanitarian truce. So reading what is happening here on the ground, and also because there is no talks about recent negotiations between Hamas and Israel, even though there is an international community pressure on both sides. However, it seems like the Palestinians here on the Gaza Strip will not be enjoying any short-term or long-term ceasefire anytime soon.
Noor Harazin reporting from Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rebuffed international calls to end the conflict and says many Western leaders have what he calls an inconsistent attitude to Hamas. Our correspondent Feng Yilei reports from Tel Aviv.
Well, I would say it is a clear gesture of rejecting international calls to end the Gaza war. And the Israeli Prime Minister's position is that these calls are, as I said, inconsistent with Israel's goal of eliminating Hamas, which Israel considers as a terrorist organization. And in his cabinet briefing, he explained that he had already had a communication to leaders of France, Germany, and other countries that they cannot support for Hamas elimination while pressuring Israel to end the war. And this stance indicates that Israel might not be ready to de-escalate the conflict immediately, but instead will focus on what they perceive as national security imperatives. And turning that words into actions, Israeli tanks are reported to have made significant advances into the Khan Yunis, the southern Gaza city, reaching the central area. And also IDF has also conducted widespread strikes in Lebanon after troops hurt by Hezbollah attacks. And also at the same time, the Israeli Prime Minister has just concluded a conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Netanyahu expressed his dissatisfaction with the positions taken by Russian representatives at the UN and other international occasions, seen as being against Israel's interests and actions. And another major point of contention raised by Netanyahu was that the cooperation between Russia and Iran. And I think these statements sort of also back what the consistency, as Netanyahu said.
Right, and meanwhile, the United States has also pushed through an emergency sale of more weapons to its close ally, Israel. That will be welcome news, though.
Well, I should say overall, as you have mentioned earlier, the U.S. is facing criticism from world leaders, international rights groups, and UN officials for its veto and for not taking actions to halt the war. And its isolated stance at the United Nations Security Council somewhat reflects growing tensions between Washington and some of even its closest allies on this issue. And Washington has also made several contrasting statements recently. For example, some anonymous Israeli officials told media earlier that the U.S. President Joe Biden had given Israel until the end of the year to finish its war against Hamas. But at the same time, Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner claimed that Washington has not imposed a firm deadline on Jerusalem. And also, meanwhile, Secretary of State Antony Blinken reported warned last week that Israel likely has weeks, not months, to wrap up the fighting. But U.S. ongoing military support for the IDF, as you said, still continues, with the Israeli Ministry of Defense disclosing on Wednesday that the U.S. has supplied Israel with 10,000 tons of arms and weaponry since the beginning of the war, as he also held the arrival of the 200th cargo plane carrying military equipment. And in addition, U.S. media indicates that the U.S. plans to sell more weapons to Israel, as the Biden administration has approved a sale of over $100 million worth of tank supplies to Israel, and that will bypass congressional approval, and it is seen as a very contentious move.
Feng Yilei reporting from Tel Aviv. In the US, the University of Pennsylvania president, Liz McGill, has resigned after her comments about anti-Semitism. McGill was criticised after refusing to say definitively at a congressional hearing whether calls for the genocide of Jews would violate the college's code of conduct regarding bullying or harassment. The polls are open in Egypt's three-day presidential election. Despite an ongoing economic crisis, incumbent Abdel Fattah el-Sisi looks set to win a third term in power. Egyptians are grappling with near-record inflation, as well as fears of a spillover from the fighting in neighbouring Gaza. Some 67 million people are eligible to vote, but a government crackdown on dissent has meant Sisi has faced little opposition. Our correspondent Adel El Marouhi has more from Cairo.
Well, the voting has been so far going mostly smoothly. No major complaints have been announced. We have 4 candidates running in the race. Each has their own committee that is monitoring and monitors observers on the ground to monitor the flow of the voting. There are about more than 11,000 ballot stations all across Egypt. 15,000 judges are monitoring these elections. That's 1 judge for every ballot box, and even more in terms of hierarchy and management. The entire election process will be stretching for 3 days. It will end on December 12th. Right after then, the counting starts. This is a manual voting procedure on paper, so it's a manual counting process. So the counting of the votes, which is expected to be in the tens of millions range, will take a lot of days, and it is expected that the final the deadline to announce the results will be around December 18th. This comes as Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is witnessing 3 other opponents that are challenging his candidacy. But however, their popularity and the strength of the political parties they represent is incomparable to the magnitude of popularity the Egyptian president has. This comes as Egypt is being challenged economically and regionally, with numerous conflicts are being around, and economy definitely will be on the agenda. After that, many measures are expected to be taking place by the next president when the elections are over.
That was Adel Al-Marouhi in Cairo. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. We're in Argentina as radical new president Javier Milei prepares for his inauguration.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Aid groups warn the humanitarian situation in Gaza is hell on earth as the United Nations vows to continue ceasefire efforts. Polls open in Egypt's presidential election, overshadowed by a deepening economic crisis and the fighting in neighbouring Gaza. Leaders from around the world are gathering in Argentina for Javier Milei's presidential inauguration. Milei was elected on a right-wing libertarian ticket, promising a wide range of radical reforms. Argentina is suffering its worst economic crisis in decades, with inflation at 143%. Jorge Jaime is a former Chilean government minister and ambassador to China and co-author of a book, The Active Non-Alignment Option. I asked him earlier how Milei's libertarian stance will be viewed on the world stage.
Well, we're already seeing the effects. It has been announced that Argentina will not accept the invitation to join the BRICS group, which had been extended at the summit held by the BRICS group in Johannesburg last August. So here we have already a first impact. A second impact has been on the relations with Brazil. President Milei expressed himself critically about President Lula in the campaign, And as a result, President Lula has not attended the inauguration of President Milei. The other point that is important to keep in mind, though, is something else. More important than foreign policy is what will happen in domestic policy. And the question that is being asked in Argentina is whether Mr. Milei will be the equivalent of Margaret Thatcher, meaning somebody that will turn the country around into the right direction and be in charge of significant changes in Argentina's economy, or whether he will be more like Liz Truss, that is, that he will only be there for a short time and be unable to implement his very ambitious program. That, it seems to me, is the big question looming over President Milei's term that he starts today.
And Milei's camp has argued that Argentina can unspool its diplomatic ties with China while avoiding a negative impact on economic ties, especially on its export industry. Is that possible?
I really don't think it is. As a rule in today's world, political and economic relations are closely intertwined. I would argue that is particularly true in terms of China and the way China handles its own foreign relations. And let me give you only one example. Argentina depends very heavily on the Argentine market to sell its soybeans, to sell its meat, to sell its grains. In that sense, the Chinese and the Argentine economies are very complementary. Mr. Milei has said that he will put the relations with the United States front and center, and he's already visited the United States and has met with government authorities in Washington, D.C. And one can understand that, because Argentina has a very heavy debt with the International Monetary Fund, $45 billion, which it can't pay. The United States must help to renegotiate that debt. But the problem is the U.S. and the Argentine economies are not complementary. The United States will not buy soybeans, grains, or meat from Argentina. So that is a significant challenge for Argentina.
The Hong Kong Special Administrative Region is holding its first district council election since its reform of the electoral system. 399 candidates are running for 264 seats across the 7th District Council. The poll is closing midnight Sunday local time, and votes will then be counted. Back in July, the city adopted the District Council amendments with the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. In the US, at least 6 people, including a child, have been killed by tornadoes and severe storms in the southeastern state of Tennessee. Another 23 people are being treated in hospital. More than 80,000 residents across the state have been left without power. Officials are urging people to stay off the roads as they continue their search and rescue operations. The COP28 climate talks in Dubai are now in a crucial phase before they conclude on Tuesday. Sunday's talks have focused on food, agriculture and water, as food production is a major source of emissions. Meanwhile, throughout the weekend, countries have clashed over a possible agreement to phase out fossil fuels. This is jeopardising attempts to deliver the first ever commitment to eventually end the use of oil and gas in 30 years of climate talks. Talk less and do more. That's the advice to COP28 delegates from Alain Richard Donwahi, the COP15 president and former Ivory Coast Minister for Water and Forests.
I think more and more countries are aware of the phenomena of climate change, and we need to take real decisions. We've been talking a lot, we've been talking too much, and we need to take real decisions that have an impact on the communities, have impact on our economies, and on our security. And so it's important that the politicians be aware. It's good, but I think that is what is more important also. What is very important is that the communities themselves, the people, be aware of what needs to be done and needs to be done now for fighting against climate change and fighting against all the land degradation that we have, the droughts, the desertification and the loss of biodiversity.
Yasser Hakim spoke with COP28 Director General in Dubai.
One of the major talking points was the confirmation of Azerbaijan being the host of COP29. It's a talking point because this is another oil-producing country that is taking over another climate conference for 2 years in a row. There were competition from Bulgaria and Moldova, but it has gone to Azerbaijan after the two other countries have suspended their candidacy. In the meantime, today was the last day of thematic themes in the conference. Every day there was a theme. Today was nature, agriculture, and farmers' rights and climate action. And this final day has seen a lot of activities concerning deforestation. That was a focus of many of the sessions, and how to try to illegalize and try to stop the deforestation in many countries. The UK has announced, among other countries, has announced a new set of laws to deal with this issue and to criminalize companies that use deforestation for producing and trading in commodities, food commodities as well. And therefore, that was one of the issues. Another was the UAE declaration on resilient food and sustainable agriculture has seen a doubling of the investments allocated to $3.1 billion since it was launched on the first day of the COP just 2 weeks ago, and 152 countries have signed up for it. But like you said earlier, the sticking point, if you can call it, is how to get a final resolution in place. And the issues go around one big hurdle, which is fossil fuel phase, or to phase out fossil fuel. And I spoke earlier with the Director General of COP28, Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi, and here's what he had to say.
There's a lot of views when it comes to the wording around fossil fuels. We know that this is a complex issue, that many, many different parties have views, but we also need to have the ambition and the ambitious outcome, and we need to tackle the emissions from the energy sector in particular. And so getting that right language is so important, because that sends the signal to the private sector, to the non-state actors, to the international community about our seriousness to tackle climate change.
Right. What he's saying here is that the differences in languages, what he means, what is happening is that there are countries, around 80 countries, mostly developed nations, and some of the countries in developing South have been calling for a phase-out, total phase-out of fossil fuels. Whilst on the other side, there is another wording, we're talking about wording and languages, about energy transition. What it means is that you do not phase out fossil fuels. You have to first increase production in renewable energies, and slowly and gradually this would reduce dependence on fossil fuels. But what phase out is the other way around. It means that you cancel fossil fuels while trying to increase production of renewable energies, while renewable energy production is not increasing at a fast rate enough to take over the renewable energy. So these are the differences here between developed nations calling for this. Oil-producing nations are calling for a transition rather than a phase-out. Now, how will this end? Well, we've got 2 days left for the COP28. That will end on the 12th. But like previous years, this could extend for another day or two if no agreement has been reached by then.
Yasser Hakim in Dubai. Well, let's return to our coverage of the inauguration of Argentina's new president, Javier Milei. We can get the latest from our correspondent, Joel Richards in Buenos Aires. Joel, Milei was elected on a populist ticket, wasn't he? Will he stick to his election promises?
Milei was sworn in just over an hour ago in Congress. His supporters are now flooding down the avenue here through central Buenos Aires to the Casa Rosada, the government house, as the day's protocols and ceremony continues. What the supporters and the country has heard Javier Milei is say that a new era starts for Argentina. He says he will end decline, he will end the decades of failure in Argentina, and he's promised an era of liberty and prosperity. To do so, he has promised austerity. That's very much in line with what Javier Milei campaigned on, the libertarian promise. He really tore up the rule book in the campaign, often seen with a chainsaw, the metaphor for what he plans to do to the economy. Since winning the elections, we have seen him tone down his agenda somewhat, but today was a very clear message that what lies ahead for Argentina is austerity. And as we said, he has toned down his agenda, but the key points remain for his economic plan for the country, with austerity, cutting away at state spending, but also for his political project. The Libertarian has amongst the official guests for his inauguration today former Brazil President Jair Bolsonaro. Abascal, the leader of the far-right party in Spain, Vox, is also here. So too Hungary Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who upon arriving in Argentina said the right continues to rise in Europe and across the world. So Javier Milei sworn in and very much looking to deliver on his promises in the campaign.
And touching more on those economic priorities, what are his biggest challenges in turning the economy round, and what could derail his radical agenda?
The challenges are immediate. Argentina is in one of its worst economic crises in decades. Inflation is in the triple digits, running at around about 140% at the moment, and that in fact is something that Milei has said will accelerate in the next couple of months because of the measures he will look to introduce and announce both today, Sunday, but also perhaps tomorrow on Monday. The country's economy is in a dire situation, as we mentioned, with low foreign reserves, and Milei, an economist himself, very much looking to focus on that aspect. The challenge will be, first of all, putting through these reforms and how they will be viewed by Argentina. People voted for Milei because they wanted change, but clearly the measures that he will look to introduce will hit people in the pocket. There is a question of governability. Just 3 years ago, Javier Milei was a TV panelist. He has a very short political career, so he does not have the stronghold in Congress. So governability is an issue, the state of the economy an issue, and with that, the social climate with very high levels of poverty.
Joel Richards reporting from Buenos Aires. Thank you very much. China has started generating electricity at its largest onshore wind farm in the desert of the northern Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. More than 700 wind turbines are able to generate more than 10 billion kilowatt hours annually, equal to the output of nearly 3 million tonnes of coal. China expects the project will reduce carbon emissions by more than 8 million tonnes. It's also creating 1,000 jobs and $56 million in income for local residents. Serbia has completed a pipeline project to Bulgaria, allowing the Balkan country to diversify its gas supplies and reduce dependence on Russia. It also gives Serbia access to gas from Azerbaijan and from Greece. The pipeline is capable of supplying enough gas to cover 60% of the country's annual needs. And finally, Japanese baseball superstar Shohei Ohtani has joined the Los Angeles Dodgers in what is the biggest deal in the sport's history. He agreed a 10-year contract worth an incredible $700 million, making him one of the richest athletes in the world. The amount is 64% higher than baseball's previous record. Ohtani became a free agent last month after leaving the Los Angeles Angels, where he won 2 of the past 3 American League Most Valuable Player awards. And that's the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's Razor. For now, from all the team in London, it's goodbye.